It started like a normal Tuesday. Quiet showroom, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, coffee brewing in the corner. The kind of morning that dealership managers call warm, not hot enough for a crowd, but promising enough that someone might walk in ready to sign. At 9:30 a.m., the door near the finance office creaked open, and in stepped a woman who didn't command attention, not at first. She didn't have that big car energy some customers carried, didn't wear power heels or designer shades. Her sneakers were worn, her hoodie slightly faded, and the manila folder tucked tightly against her chest looked heavy, not with weight but with worry. In her other hand she carried a baby carrier. A 6-month-old still in dreamland, swaddled in soft yellow and breathing gently. The child's peaceful presence contrasted sharply with the tension in his mother's shoulders. She didn't look around. She wasn't browsing. She had already made her decision. She was here to pick up the car she had signed for the day before. Her name was Rachel Monroe. To the sales team, she was just another customer. But if they had looked closer, if they had cared enough to remember, someone might have recognized her. Not as a buyer, but as a former insider. Once years ago, she had worked in the corporate shadows of the Reeves Auto Group, not at this branch, but 2 states away, crunching numbers in a regional accounting role. She was precise, principled, quiet, the kind of employee who didn't raise hell, but did raise questions when something smelled wrong. And that's what got her quietly pushed out. But no one here remembered, least of all the man approaching her now with a slick-back grin and clipboard in hand, Chad Morrison, senior sales associate, self-declared deal closer, and the kind of guy who believed speed was power and charm was currency. He opened with a line that oozed artificial warmth. "Miss Monroe, great to see you again. Just one more thing to go over before we wrap this up." Rachel nodded politely. She followed him into a narrow glass-walled office near the finance section. She didn't speak much. She was focused, fingers clutched tight on her folder mind, clearly racing through details. Numbers. Terms. Something felt off. Chad, meanwhile, slid into his chair like a performer ready for Act Two. He pulled up a document on his tablet, hit print, and retrieved the page with practiced ease. Then, like a magician revealing a trick, he laid the paper in front of her. "Just a few post-signing delivery items," he said breezily. "Totally normal. I'll walk you through it." Rachel frowned. "This wasn't on the sheet I signed yesterday." Chad didn't blink. "Yeah, corporate updated the delivery process last quarter. Same price, just broken out differently. Happens all the time." His smile was slick, but his tone was tightening just slightly. "You're still getting the same car, same deal. This just finalizes the paperwork trail." Rachel's fingers twitched. She flipped open her manila folder, inside a copy of yesterday's signed contract, carefully tabbed and highlighted. A single glance told her this wasn't just paperwork, because now tacked on the final version were fees she hadn't seen before. $495 electronics protection plan, $275 server interior sterilization fee, $395 VIN etching and theft recovery. It didn't add up, not legally, not ethically. And somewhere just beyond the glass, someone was watching. 2 aisles away, hidden behind a rotating stand of roadside brochures, stood Jackson Reeves, the founder and CEO of the entire dealership chain. But no one knew that. Not today. Today he wore a black hoodie and sneakers, blending in like a customer who'd wandered in early. He hadn't entered through the front. He hadn't announced his arrival. He hadn't told his own regional VP. He came unannounced because something had been nagging at him for months. Not one big scandal, just whispers, a padded warranty in Knoxville, misquoted numbers in Franklin, declining customer trust across the board. Nothing concrete. Until now. When Jackson saw Rachel, the very employee who once flagged fraud in Memphis, and then mysteriously vanished sitting in a finance office with a folder too thick and a face too still, he knew. This wasn't just a gut feeling anymore. It was proof in motion. Back in the office, Chad was still selling. "Look," he said, "the electronics plan is bundled into your financing offer. It's not technically required, but it optimizes credit scoring locks in the lower rate. Trust me, it's a win." Rachel didn't answer immediately. She looked at the line labeled VIN etching. "Why is this listed?" she asked. "I don't remember this being quoted." Chad barely hesitated. "Oh, that's standard. Every vehicle gets prepped with VIN etching for theft deterrence. It's already been done." A lie. Jackson's jaw tightened. VIN etching had been discontinued chain-wide in 2021. Jackson himself had ordered it removed after uncovering misuse in Arkansas. It was a ghost fee, a scam, and this slick-talking agent was peddling it like candy. Rachel's baby stirred. She didn't flinch. didn't raise her voice. She simply asked, "Can I take this home to review before I sign again?" That was the moment. The room shifted. The air changed. Chad's voice dropped low and cold. "You already signed, so shut up and take the car." Silence. Not the kind you hear, but the kind you feel like every molecule in the air paused, waiting for someone to say or do something. Rachel didn't cry. She didn't shout, but her fingers curled slightly tighter around her folder. Her breath came slower, more deliberate. She looked not afraid, but disappointed. It was a silence Chad had mistaken for submission. But Jackson Reeves knew better. The CEO stepped forward, not as a customer, not as a stranger, but as a man who had built his company on trust and just watched someone stain his name with a lie. He walked in without a word, calm, controlled. Then he said clearly, "That delivery fee, that's not part of the agreement." Chad blinked. Rachel looked up startled. "Excuse me," Chad asked, trying to smile. "The VIN etching, the electronics plan, none of that is in the approved package." "Show me where it says it is," Jackson said. Chad stammered, "Look, I don't know who you are, but you will." Rachel stood slowly, carrier in hand. The baby cooed, oblivious to the shift in atmosphere. Chad flushed. "Sir, I've been here 4 years. I know the system." Jackson didn't blink. He pointed at the paper. "Then show her. Right now. Where in our system, the one I built, does it say this dealership is authorized to charge for VIN etching?" Silence. In the hallway behind them, someone else appeared, Tom Whitaker, the branch manager. When he saw who was speaking, his face turned pale. "Mr. Reeves," he whispered. Chad turned too confused. "Wait, what?" Jackson didn't acknowledge either. He looked only at Rachel. "I'm sorry," he said. "This isn't how we treat people, not under my name." That moment, quiet, powerful, irreversible, marked the beginning of a reckoning. A mother had asked a simple question. A salesman gave her a lie. And the man who owned the company had heard everything. When Jackson Reeves woke up that morning, he didn't put on a suit, no tie, no polished shoes, no press release. He reached for an old black hoodie that still smelled faintly of engine grease and pulled on a pair of sneakers he hadn't worn since the company's early days. Then he grabbed the keys to a 2010 Honda Civic, the car his nephew left behind when he moved to Seattle, and drove 2 blocks from the dealership before parking in a shadowed alley behind a diner. No one would notice him today. That was the point. It wasn't that Jackson liked playing dress-up or undercover games. This wasn't a TV show. He was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixed, but the kind of tired that came from watching something you built start to erode slowly, quietly, when no one thought you were looking. So today he was looking. He stepped into the side entrance of Reeves Auto Group, Charlotte Branch, at 9:45 a.m. The hallway by the service bay still smelled like coolant and burnt coffee. Years ago, he used to fix tires in this very garage before anyone knew his name. Now his name was on the glass bold white letters, Reeves Auto Group. But today the bold letters felt hollow. He scanned the interior like a surgeon diagnosing a silent illness. Reception desk empty. Sales pitch scattered. One guy chatting by the water cooler. 2 desks unmanned. It was supposed to be peak prep hour when paperwork got double-checked and cars were polished before handover. Instead, the place felt like a casual Tuesday in a tired office park. Jackson had come here not to reprimand, not to fire, not yet. He'd come because something didn't feel right. Over the past few months, subtle warnings had crept into his inbox. A woman in Knoxville said her warranty didn't match the paperwork. A man in Franklin noticed hidden fees that weren't quoted. Surveys came back flatter than usual, vague frustrations, silent signals. No single complaint was explosive. But when Jackson stepped back, the pattern emerged like a watermark on paper. That's why he was here. Not to chase one bad deal, but to check the tone of the place. Tone was everything. He used to say it all the time in meetings. A business's tone isn't set by rules. It's set by what people do when no one's watching. And today, no one knew he was watching. That's when he saw her, a woman in a blue hoodie near the finance office, holding a folder like a shield. A baby sleeping quietly in the carrier beside her. There was something about the stillness in her posture. Calculated, not nervous, alert. Rachel Monroe. The name hit him like a note from the past. She used to work in the Memphis regional office 3 years back, a junior accounting assistant, but sharp. She once flagged a fleet sale for duplicate invoice numbers, an error that would have cost the company $18,000 in refunds if it had slipped through. Jackson remembered her report, how it was concise, principled. And then one day she was gone. No formal complaint, no transfer request, just disappeared. HR had marked her as a voluntary resignation, but Jackson had never felt quite right about it. And now here she was again, not as an employee, but as a customer. He ducked behind the brochure rack near the vending machines, watching. The man greeting Rachel was Chad Morris, and everything about him was slick suit smile movement. He gestured to Rachel like he was selling magic, not metal. Clipboard in hand, he walked her toward the finance office. Jackson followed at a distance. He positioned himself behind a pillar near the customer lounge where the light reflections off the glass gave him a perfect angle. Chad printed a contract and began his pitch. Jackson watched the conversation unfold wordlessly, every gesture telling more than the dialogue ever could. Chad's movements were quick, calculated, his voice just a little too smooth. Rachel's posture remained still, but her fingers tightened around the folder. When she questioned the fees, Chad spun the language like a pro, bundled in standard delivery protocol corporate updates. Jackson's stomach tightened. He recognized those phrases. He had written the actual policy, the real one, 2 years ago. The version designed to protect customers, not confuse them. It required that any post-signing fees be logged with a timestamp, a regional manager code, and a signed customer acknowledgement. That was policy. But the paper Chad handed Rachel didn't follow that format. The fonts were mismatched. The section headers looked off. It wasn't corporate, it was counterfeit professionalism. And when Chad listed the VIN etching as already done, that's when Jackson's pulse spiked. VIN etching had been banned. He had personally killed it. It was a phantom charge, a lie printed in fine ink. He stepped back, hand gripping the corner of the display stand. Everything made sense now. This wasn't about one unethical rep, it was deeper. The receptionist too distracted to greet customers. The sales pit half empty during peak hours. The finance team letting these forms slide through. The managers either blind to the lies or too apathetic to stop them. Jackson knew this culture. Not because he created it, but because he had allowed it to fester. We stopped listening, he thought. We stopped paying attention. He circled the floor again slowly, using the shadows of the showroom to stay invisible. Watching. One salesman bragged near the vending machines about locking in another sucker. A receptionist played a game on her phone. A middle-aged customer waited alone with papers in his hand. No one offered water. No one said hello. Jackson leaned beside a black RAV4. From here, he had a clear line of sight into the finance office again. Chad was still talking, but Rachel wasn't listening anymore. Not really. Her expression had hardened not with confrontation, but with quiet calculation. She was doing the math in her head, weighing how much she could afford to lose to avoid starting over. The kind of math single mothers knew too well. The kind of math he saw in his own mother's eyes when he was a boy. She wasn't scared. She was cornered. And that's when it hit him. Chad wasn't just selling, he was betting. He was betting that Rachel wouldn't push back, that she wouldn't cause a scene, that she didn't know her rights, that she looked too ordinary, too overworked, too alone. He was betting that no one was watching. Jackson's jaw clenched, not in rage, but in certainty. He'd seen enough. The problem wasn't the fees or the form, or even Chad. The problem was tone. The problem was culture. The problem was what happens when people forget that every sale is a story someone will tell again later with either shame or gratitude. Jackson stepped away from the RAV4, headed toward the glass office. Each footstep slow, measured, deliberate. He didn't need to scream. He didn't need a title or a badge or a nameplate. He just needed the truth to walk into that room with him. Because sometimes fixing a company doesn't start with an audit or a meeting. Sometimes it starts by listening through glass in silence until you know exactly how far your people have fallen. And then walking in. The moment Jackson Reeves stepped through the glass doorway of that finance office, the atmosphere snapped like a wire pulled too tight. He didn't slam the door, didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The force he brought into that room wasn't volume, it was weight. The kind that made people instinctively sit straighter, breathe slower, rethink their choices. The kind that didn't come from being the CEO of Reeves Auto Group, but from being the man who built it from the ground up. Rachel Monroe looked up startled. Chad Morris and the salesman blinked twice as if he was trying to place the stranger who just walked in. His clipboard paused mid-sentence, the fake warmth draining from his eyes as he took in Jackson's steady presence, hoodie sneakers, quiet authority. Then Jackson spoke. That delivery fee? It's not part of the agreement. Chad blinked. Excuse me. Jackson stepped forward, one hand casually resting on the edge of the desk. The VIN etching, the electronics protection, that's not in the approved package. His voice was calm, controlled. but every syllable landed like a judge's gavel. Show me where it says it is. Chad's mouth opened, but no words came. His eyes flicked to the computer screen to the hallway beyond Jackson, then back again, a silent, desperate search for backup that wasn't coming. Look, I don't know who you are, but you will, Jackson interrupted. Now explain this, in front of her. He pointed at Rachel, whose eyes widened slightly, not in fear, but in realization. Something had shifted. Power had shifted. And for once, it wasn't away from her. Chad straightened, trying to regain control with posture alone. Sir, I've been here 4 years. I know the packages inside and out. Jackson didn't move. Good, then show her, right now. Where does it say this dealership is authorized to charge for VIN etching? Chad's voice wavered. It's in the system. Finance will break it down better when we run final forms. No, Jackson said flatly. You break it down. Now, in front of her. That was when Rachel stood up. She didn't say a word, but the way she lifted the carrier, slow, deliberate, said enough. She wasn't going to be silent anymore. Her silence had become a presence in the room, a force stronger than anger. I don't have to do this, Chad snapped suddenly. I don't even know who you... He stopped mid-sentence. Because at that exact moment, a man appeared in the hallway. Tom Whitaker, branch manager, crisp blazer, dealership lanyard, still swinging from his neck. He froze, eyes locked on Jackson. His voice dropped to a breath. Mr. Reeves, ce paso. Chad's head turned sharply. Wait. What? But Jackson didn't acknowledge either of them. He turned only to Rachel. I'm sorry, he said gently. This isn't how we treat people. Not here, not under my name. Rachel's brows furrowed. The baby stirred slightly in the carrier, as if sensing the shift in energy. But Jackson was already moving. He turned to Tom. I need a conference room. Tom swallowed hard, nodded, and motioned down the hall like a man who had just realized the iceberg was under his ship the whole time. Chad didn't speak. Couldn't. His clipboard now hung limply by his side. Jackson turned back to Rachel. Please come with me. I want to make this right. She nodded slowly. Her steps were cautious but confident. Every eye in the sales floor turned as they walked. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Phones that had been ringing were suddenly silent. Not because of policy, but because everyone could feel it. Something had cracked open. A reckoning had walked in through the side door. The conference room was small, windowless corporate gray. Jackson held the door for Rachel and then sat across from her, calm but unyielding. Tom entered next, still pale. Chad followed slower now, the confidence draining from him like air from a balloon. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, but his posture betrayed him. He was sweating through his shirt. Jackson reached for the clipboard Chad had left behind, flipped it open. He circled 3 separate charges with a pen. Explain these. Chad shuffled. Everyone includes those. It's standard. Jackson didn't look up. Do you have documentation showing they're approved? They're in the system. No, they're not. His tone sharpened. I helped rewrite that system. He turned the clipboard toward the others. VIN etching discontinued in 2021. Powertrain coverage capped at 5 years, not full electronics. Interior sterilization never approved as a standard fee. He looked at Rachel. You were told your monthly payment would be $349, right? She nodded slowly. That's only possible if you put down $2,000. And even then, the rate Chad quoted you was inflated by 2.5 points. Rachel's lips parted, but no sound came. Her hands trembled faintly over the baby carrier strap. That's not a mistake, Jackson said. That's a con. Chad pushed off the wall. I hit my numbers. Customers leave happy. I know how to sell. Jackson leaned forward. No, you know how to pressure. And there's a difference. Tom finally spoke, his voice weak. Jackson, I mean Mr. Reeves, I didn't know he was doing this. I swear. The numbers look solid, I figured. That's the problem, Jackson snapped. You looked at the numbers. I looked at the people. Rachel stood slowly, visibly shaken, not from fear, but from a quiet kind of fury. The betrayal wasn't just from Chad. It was from the entire system that let it happen. She whispered more to herself than anyone else. I thought this was a good place. Jackson turned to her, his tone softening. It was supposed to be, and I'm sorry it wasn't. He reached into his back pocket and slid a card across the table. This is my direct line. If you still want the car, you'll get it at the right price with none of this garbage. I'll personally make sure of it. She looked at the card like it might vanish if she blinked. Thank you, she said. We'll have someone else handle the paperwork, Jackson added. Someone who doesn't invent numbers. Chad's voice cracked. Are you serious? Jackson stood. Clean out your desk. You're done here. Come on, no negotiation. Jackson's voice was final. You knew better. You just didn't care. Chad didn't argue. Not again. He turned muttering under his breath and walked out defeated. Not just because he lost his job, but because he lost it in front of everyone. Jackson turned to Tom. We're not done talking either. I'll see you in your office in 10. Then he escorted Rachel back toward the lobby. This time the silence was even heavier. Every salesperson who had once looked past her now watched her walk with the CEO. No one dared whisper. As they passed the front desk, Jackson paused. Did you greet her when she walked in? He asked the receptionist. She blinked. I don't remember. Jackson nodded. Start remembering or start looking. But he knew better. This wasn't about one Chad, one manager, one receptionist. This was about culture, about tone, about 1,000 small choices that over time had shifted a company from something he was proud of into something he barely recognized. And now, at Secondum, now it was time to rebuild. The glass door to Tom Whitaker's office closed with a soft click behind Jackson Reeves. But the air inside was anything but soft. Tom sat hunched in the high-back leather chair he once leaned into like a throne. Now he looked smaller, not physically but morally. His fingers fidgeted against the edge of a spiral notebook, open and untouched. The pen on top hadn't moved. Neither had Tom's eyes, which flicked between the floor of the desk and occasionally Jackson, never resting too long anywhere. Jackson didn't sit right away. He walked over to the window, the one overlooking the showroom floor, and stared down at the desks, the sales staff pretending to work, the receptionist still frozen at her station. The room felt quieter than usual, he said flatly. Like everyone's waiting for a verdict. Tom swallowed. Jackson, Mr. Reeves, I didn't know Chad was doing that. I swear to you. Jackson kept his eyes on the window. You didn't know, or you didn't look. Tom exhaled through his nose. I knew complaints were going up. I knew satisfaction scores dipped. But I thought maybe the survey system was off. We've been short-staffed. Don't, Jackson interrupted, turning. Don't start layering excuses over rot. You knew something. You felt it. But you let it slide because the numbers look good. He moved toward the desk, now every step deliberate. That's the problem, Tom. You looked at the numbers. I looked at the people. Tom didn't respond. Because what could he say? He had seen it. The silent shifts. The shortcuts that turned into strategy. The tone of the place curdling quietly under the pressure to hit monthly targets. Jackson sat, now slow and steady. What happened to what we built? Tom rubbed his eyes. I thought we were doing okay. Turnover was low. The market's tough. The market didn't change, Tom. We did. We stopped listening. We stopped paying attention. We stopped treating people like people. Silence. Then Jackson stood again. So here's what we're going to do. His voice sharpened like a blade pulled from its sheath. First, we clean house, not just Chad. Every deal from the last 90 days, I want them pulled and reviewed. One by one. Anything that wasn't clearly explained, refund it immediately. Tom nodded, jaw tight. Second, every manager in this region is getting retrained. Ethics, transparency, human decency. And you're going to. Tom blinked. Mika Sayer, you most of all. Jackson walked toward the door, but paused with his hand on the knob. Oh, and one more thing. I want Trevor in my office next week. Tom furrowed his brow. The lot kid. Yeah, because he was the only one today who looked a customer in the eye. That still matters. 3 days later, the entire dealership shut down for a mandatory all-hands meeting. Phones were rerouted to voicemail. No sales, no deliveries, no exceptions. Every employee showed up, even the part-timers. The break room was packed wall to wall. The vending machines, torn leather couches, and whiteboard listing top closers, now faded reminders of a different tone. Jackson didn't use a mic, didn't stand behind a podium. He stood at the front of the room in a navy blue suit and polished leather shoes, not because he wanted to look powerful, but because he wanted to look accountable. He looked each person in the eye as he began. I started this company in 2004, he said. No investors, no franchise. Just a used car lot behind a barbecue joint in Murfreesboro. A few chuckles broke the tension. I sold 3 cars my first week. I washed every one of them myself. I didn't know if I'd make it, but I had 2 things, my name and my word. I never promised what I couldn't deliver. I never lied to close a deal. The room went still. Somewhere along the way, we forgot that. He looked around the room. Not all of us, but enough. His gaze was heavy now, like judgment without malice. If you've ever added a fee because you thought no one would notice, if you ever rushed a woman out the door because she didn't look like she could pay, If you ever talk down to someone who asked too many questions today is your wake-up call. Some employees looked down, others sat frozen eyes wide. Then from the back corner, a voice spoke. What if some of us were doing things right, but no one ever noticed? It was Trevor, the lot attendant, the kid who had offered water to Rachel, who had opened the side door with a smile, who had never once made a sale but had still made a difference. Jackson smiled. He stepped forward, pulled an envelope from his pocket, and handed it to Trevor. Then we start noticing. Inside a promotion letter. From lot attendant to junior sales associate with full training and benefits. Trevor stared at it wide-eyed. Are you serious? Serious as a heart attack, Jackson said. Because people who treat others with respect, those are the ones I want representing my name. The room didn't cheer. It didn't need to. The silence was louder than applause. That afternoon, Jackson called Helen Briggs, the no-nonsense former front desk manager who had quit 2 years earlier, saying, the place just doesn't feel the same anymore. She came back as the new head of customer relations. Her first order of business, installing a glass partition between the sales floor and the finance office so nothing could be whispered that couldn't be said in public. Rewriting the delivery process, removing all optional but bundled fees. Rebuilding the intake protocol so every first-time buyer got a 1-1 walkthrough, no matter how small the deal. By the end of the week, 5 of Chad Morrison's past deals had been refunded in full or in part. In Rachel Monroe's case, it became the first slide in a new training seminar called Pressure versus Proof when Sales Cross the Line. Friday morning, Jackson stood beside a row of certified pre-owned sedans, just watching. The air was different. Not louder, not faster, but careful, considerate. Not out of fear, out of awareness. He saw a young salesman kneel beside an older customer, patiently walking them through trim-level options. No fast talk, no pressure. That couldn't be tracked on a spreadsheet. But it was exactly what mattered. Helen walked up beside him. Looks like they remember who they work for, she said. Jackson nodded. They better, because I'm not going anywhere. The sun had barely cleared the Tennessee horizon when Jackson Reeves stepped onto the creaking porch of his mother's old house. The kind of quiet that only existed before the world woke up blanketed the yard. Not even birds had started singing yet. He stood still, a steaming mug of black coffee in one hand, the other tucked in the pocket of his jacket. The wood beneath his feet was worn the same wood he used to scrub down every Saturday morning as a teenager, when his mom would yell, "Don't leave footprints where respect should go." Respect. That word had followed him all his life. Not because he was taught it in school, but because he had watched it in motion through his mother's sacrifices, her dignity, her refusal to ever lower her standards, even when money was tight and the world wasn't fair. Jackson placed the mug gently on the railing and reached into his jacket. He pulled out a photograph. Its edges were faded, curling at the corners. The color had drained with time, but the moment it captured was still vivid in his mind. A 10-year-old boy stood proudly beside a rust-colored Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme, grinning with a mix of pride and disbelief. Behind him, one hand resting on his shoulder, stood his mother's eyes squinting against the sun smile, wide and solid. Not because the car was flashy, it wasn't. Not because it was new, it wasn't. But because it was hers. Bought with her own hands, her own work, her own paycheck. Jackson remembered that day as if it had happened yesterday. His mother had worked double shifts at the hospital for months, night nurse 12-hour rotations, feet sore, back aching. She packed lunches from scratch and skipped new shoes to save for the down payment. He remembered how she dressed that morning, hair tied neatly, lipstick on, wearing her Sunday blouse, even though it was Wednesday. He thought she was nervous, but looking back, she was standing tall, because she was about to do something powerful, something most people take for granted. She was about to buy her first car. No co-signer, no credit padding, just a small down payment and a nurse's paycheck. The salesman that day, Jackson would never forget him. White button-down, clip-on tie, soft voice. Never once rushed them, never once talked down to her. He explained every document carefully, asked if she had questions, and waited patiently when she did. When she signed the final form, she turned to Jackson and said, "This is what pride looks like when you earn it." Jackson closed his eyes, holding that memory close. Because earlier that week in his own dealership under his own name, a young mother was almost robbed of that same moment. Rachel Monroe hadn't shouted. She hadn't stormed. She had done exactly what his mother had done all those years ago, showed up with the paperwork in hand, a quiet sense of pride in her chest and a baby at her side. But instead of dignity, she had been met with manipulation. "You already signed, so shut up and take the car." Jackson clenched the photo tighter. That sentence, it echoed like a slap every time it replayed in his mind. Not just because it was cruel, but because someone said it under his logo, under his name, under a company that was never supposed to sound like that. He looked back toward the yard. Same grass, same old bird bath now rusted, same wind chimes that clinked gently when the breeze hit from the east. The bones of the house hadn't changed. Neither had the bones of who he was. By Monday, he was back at the dealership, but not in disguise, not undercover. He walked through the front doors wearing a tailored navy suit and clean leather shoes, not to show off, but to make something clear. He was watching now, and he wasn't going away. Phones were routed to voicemail. Morning meetings cleared. Every employee from finance officers to lot attendants gathered in the main hall. This time there was no speech. There was a plaque, simple, etched in brushed steel, no gimmicks, no quotes pulled from management books. Just one sentence. We treat every customer like they're buying their very first car with dignity, patience, and truth. Jackson installed it himself with a drill in his own hands. He didn't call a press photographer. He didn't post it online. He just stood back, wiped the steel clean with his sleeve, and walked away. Trevor was the first to read it. Every morning before clock-in, he paused by the plaque and whispered the words under his breath like a promise. Then Rachel came back a month later for her first service appointment. She wore the same hoodie. Her baby, now older, more alert, peeked out from the carrier on her chest. She walked in through the front door, this time head-high steps easy. Trevor was behind the desk. He smiled when he saw her. "You remember me?" she asked. "Of course I do," he grinned. "We got you in that silver Corolla, right?" She nodded. "She's running great." They chatted for a few minutes, nothing major, just small talk. But it wasn't awkward. It was natural. It was human. And Jackson saw the whole thing through the glass window of his office. He didn't step out, didn't interrupt, because this moment wasn't about him. It was about a culture slowly healing, about a company finding its way back to its roots, about a promise his mother had made without ever speaking it out loud, that respect wasn't optional and dignity was non-negotiable. Some companies chase numbers. Some chase headlines. Jackson didn't want either. He wanted a company where a woman could ask, "Why wasn't this fee here yesterday?" and be told the truth without shame, without pressure, without spin, because it was never about a contract. It was always about trust. It started with a small envelope. No fanfare, no confetti, no big company-wide announcement. Just a plain white envelope passed from one hand to another in a quiet break room full of tired faces and stale vending machine coffee. But for Trevor, it felt like everything had changed. Inside the envelope was a letter, not fancy, not glossy, just a single page on company letterhead that read, "Effective immediately, you are promoted to junior sales associate with full training and benefits. Welcome to the next level." Signed at the bottom in clean, deliberate script, Jackson Reeves. Trevor stared at the letter for a long time, almost afraid it might vanish if he blinked. He wasn't the loudest guy on the lot. He didn't crack jokes with the closers, didn't golf with the managers. He just showed up on time every shift, rain or shine. Parked cars, filled tanks, opened doors for customers who weren't expecting kindness. He had no idea that being decent still counted, until the day it did. That same week, Jackson made another call, one that surprised everyone in the region. He brought back Helen Briggs. If you worked at Reeves Auto Group in the past decade, you knew Helen. Steel hair, no-nonsense stare. She used to run the front desk like it was a warship, efficient, clear fare. She greeted every customer like they mattered and every employee like they'd better mean what they said. But 2 years ago, she left. Not because of money, not because of hours, but because, as she put it in her resignation letter, "The place doesn't feel the same anymore. We stopped looking people in the eye." Now she was back, as the newly appointed head of customer relations. Her first move bold, unapologetic, and deeply symbolic. She ordered the installation of a glass partition between the sales floor and the finance offices, not to create distance, but to eliminate secrecy. If it can't be said in public, she told the team it shouldn't be said at all. And just like that, the whispered upsells, the shady walkthroughs, the pressure tactics, they had nowhere left to hide. Jackson didn't stop there. He sent a directive to the HR department. Every manager across every branch was to attend a mandatory 3-week ethics and customer care workshop. There would be no exceptions. Not for tenure, not for title, not even for himself. "If we're rebuilding," he said, "we're rebuilding from the top down. And I'm the top." Chad Morrison's legacy, meanwhile, was used in a very different way. The clipboard he had left behind with all the fabricated fees and forced smiles was turned into slide number 1 of a new training series called Pressure vs. Proof: What Happens When Sales Cross the Line. Rachel Monroe's story with her permission became the centerpiece of that first session. The message wasn't "don't get caught." The message was, "Don't betray the trust that got them through the door in the first place." And then came the audits. Every single contract from the past 90 days was reviewed line by line, fee by fee. Not just by finance, but by a newly formed compliance integrity team created at Jackson's request. The findings: 5 of Chad's deals required partial or full refunds. 3 other reps were retrained not because they were malicious, but because they'd been taught to prioritize speed over sincerity. One manager resigned quietly before the retraining began. "It's fine," Jackson said. "Let the door hit the ego on the way out." But this wasn't about retribution, it was about realignment. The dealership began to hum with a new kind of energy. Not frantic, not fake, but aware. Cautious in the best way. Like a team that realized it was no longer being watched for quotas, but for character. One Thursday morning, Jackson stood near the line of pre-owned Camrys pretending to check tire pressure, while quietly watching interactions unfold across the floor. He saw a new salesperson nervous, unsure pause while helping an elderly couple understand financing terms. Instead of rushing them, he said, "Take your time, we'll go line by line together." That alone made Jackson smile. Because you can't teach that in a brochure. You build it into a culture. He felt someone step beside him, Helen clipboard in hand, eyes scanning like a general surveying her army. "Looks like they remember who they work for," she said, her voice dry but warm. Jackson nodded. "They better, because I'm not going anywhere." The transformation didn't happen overnight. There were setbacks, awkward retraining sessions, eye rolls from old-school closers, a few complaints from customers who expected to be rushed who didn't know what to make of the slower, more transparent process. But slowly things shifted. The receptionist started standing up to greet people again. The coffee station was cleaned and stocked. Deal folders had fewer post-it notes and more transparency. And Trevor, he made his first sale within 10 days. It wasn't big, a certified pre-owned Civic to a local teacher, but he walked her through every detail, took 45 minutes to explain the features, and when she left, she said something that made Jackson choke up. "That boy treated me like I was buying a Rolls Royce." That night, Jackson stayed late. The lot was quiet moonlight, stretching across the rows of vehicles like silver paint. He sat in his office, lights off, staring at the new mission plaque above the showroom entrance. "We treat every customer like they're buying their very first car, with dignity, patience, and truth." It wasn't a slogan. It was a promise to his mother, to Rachel, to Trevor, to everyone who had ever walked into a dealership hoping for respect and walked out feeling smaller. Because Jackson knew now deeply that you don't fix a broken company with slogans or firings. You fix it by listening, by showing up, by asking again when no one else does, by not letting the silence win. The week ended as quietly as it began. No applause, no corporate announcement, no feature article in a glossy leadership magazine. Just a Friday evening at Reeves Auto Group, where the sky melted from blue to amber, and the last rays of sunlight stretched across the showroom floor like a silent spotlight. Jackson Reeves stood near the window in his office, alone, hands in his pockets. From here, he could see everything. The receptionist now standing when customers entered. The soft hum of conversations in the sales pit, slower, calmer. Trevor gently explaining a lease agreement to a young couple, his hands steady, voice level. Rachel Monroe sitting in the waiting room with a paperback in her lap, her baby now older, swaying gently in the same carrier. Jackson didn't step out, didn't interrupt. Because this moment wasn't about him. It never was. He thought back to everything that had happened in just a few weeks. How it started with a whisper, a complaint, an instinct, a quiet unease. How it nearly slid by, unnoticed, brushed off, as just how things work now. And how one woman, without shouting, without threatening, simply asked a question. Why wasn't this fee on the contract yesterday? Not with suspicion, but with dignity. And how a salesman, thinking he was untouchable, responded with, "You already signed, so shut up and take the car." Those words would echo for a long time, not because of how loud they were, but because of how confident they were. Confidence born from a culture that had stopped caring. And confidence that ended the moment someone decided to watch again. Jackson had always believed leadership was about vision, growth, strategy, the metrics they teach in business school. But now as he looked across the floor, he realized something simpler, harder, and more profound. Leadership is quiet. It's not the speech in the break room. It's not the plaque on the wall. It's not the headlines or the posts. It's the moment you decide to stay late, to listen longer, to show up when you could have stayed hidden, to say we can do better when no one is clapping. Earlier that week, he'd asked himself, what happened to what we built? The answer had become painfully clear. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't a hostile takeover. It was silence. Rot never announces itself. It creeps in quietly disguised as convenience. It's just one extra fee. It's just how we lock in the rate. They probably won't notice. And slowly, without alarms, decency gets replaced by pressure, and no one notices until someone like Rachel walks in. Not as a whistleblower, not as an enemy, but as a reminder of what mattered all along. Jackson turned from the window and sat down. The desk felt heavier now, not because of what was on it, but because of what it represented: a second chance. Not just for the company, but for him. He reached into the bottom drawer and pulled out the photo again, the one of his 10-year-old self beside his mother and the rust-colored Cutlass Supreme. He looked at the smile on her face. Pride, dignity, belief, not in the car, but in the way she was treated when she bought it. That's where this all began. That's where it needed to return. The following week, he had one final plaque installed, not on the wall, but above the showroom entrance, etched in simple steel. This isn't about cars, this is about people. The final act wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the firing. It wasn't the refunds. It wasn't even the speeches. It was what happened after, when no one thought anyone was watching. Like when Jackson watched Helen cross her arms near the glass eyes scanning the floor with that old familiar vigilance, as if she'd never left. Like when Trevor brought a bottle of water to an elderly man without being asked. Like when a sales rep paused mid-sentence and said, wait, before we move forward, let me explain what this fee actually means. Like when Rachel smiled, not because she got a deal, but because she got treated like someone who mattered. And that was the point. You don't rebuild trust with press releases. You rebuild it with proof. One decision at a time, one employee at a time, one honest moment at a time. As the lights dimmed across the showroom, Jackson closed his eyes and let the silence sit. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was earned. Because after all the noise, the lies, the pressure, the cover-ups, what remained was this. Leadership isn't what you say. It's what you protect when no one's watching.